Hey there! Welcome to Spectrum Pulse, where we talk about music, movies, art, and culture. And we're starting a year-end list. Let's inevitably start with the biggest, the top 10 worst hit songs of 2024. When I put together my top 10 worst hit songs of 2023, I said that it felt like I was wishing on a monkey's paw, where for every hope I had for the year, the downside seemed to eclipse it, irregardless of genre or the best songs of that year trying to make up for it. And hell, at least for me in 2023, the best songs were so strong that I think they were capable of doing it. Call it my bias towards country, but when the genre dominates the charts with a banner year, I think that's worth highlighting. But 2024 feels like a different beast altogether. One where many have gone on record calling this a new golden year, new golden era for pop, a banner year for the charts where they matter. And look, I track them every week on my side channel on Billboard Breakdown, and the perception of what's popular on social media has never felt more dissonant with the reality of what hits the charts, and by extension, what folks are actually consuming. Because the Hot 100 is a janky, frequently gamed, often broken system propped up by corrupted music industry machinations, but in terms of the data, it's more representative of a truth than so many want to admit, especially as, like last year, I'm using the expanded list provided for me by Talk of the Charts that is dated to be more representative than Billboard's bastardization of a calendar year that's not getting better. So with all that in mind, look, it was messier than folks recognize, inevitably tainted early by the UMG TikTok feud in the spring that led to a lot of weird anomalies across the charts, rarely for the better. And in individual genres, well, R&B was all over the place. Regional Mexican, reggaeton, and K-pop felt incredibly uneven. And after 2 strong years for country, 2024 was a notable downturn. The fact that Beyonce had precisely one song that lasted from Cowboy Carter, while both Shaboozey and Post Malone racked up traction, felt like a weird omen all year, regardless of the quality. Then there's hip-hop and trap. And for as much as I think there was certainly an uptick in bigger stories, some of which produced some huge hits and moments, how much that translated to better music that'll last overall, well, I'll say it, it's kind of questionable. But of course, we gotta talk about the pop music, and look, this is where I feel both in and out of the zeitgeist, or at least what people say the zeitgeist is. We saw big breakthroughs for Gracie Abrams, Sabrina Carpenter, Chappell Roan, and in that order, we got a Taylor Swift wannabe, an artist of who I've had very mixed opinions on since the late 2010s, and an admittedly fantastic debut, who I was early on, and listening to most in 2023 when I reviewed her album. Combine that with my lukewarm opinions on Billie Eilish's new project, and how I did not have the Brat summer so many tried, talking about a meme curdling in too many expected ways. My favorite pop story of 2024 was probably Taylor Swift for the Tortured Poets Department, which the internet told me nobody liked, except for how many album bomb cuts that had impressive runs this year. So clearly a lot of folks really did. I bring all this up to highlight that for as much as so many claim 2024 was some great year, I was considerably more underwhelmed. Certainly not a bad year compared to some of which I've covered, which will be all the more true when we get to the best list, but the sort of eventful year where I couldn't escape that bad smell leaking up from the bottom that there was a lot more crap than many would see until it's way too late. But with all that in mind, let's get into our dishonorable mentions. Once again, no particular order here.
I like the way you kiss me. I can tell you miss me. I can tell it is. Not trying to be romantic. I'll hit it from the back just so you don't get attached.
Gonna start off with a bit of a curveball, and something I guarantee a bunch of you have already forgotten. We got a slice of faux dark wave that only went viral and saw traction because of the UMG TikTok beef was warping the Hot 100, so this caught a brief window to get popular. And you think that on the sound alone, the goth part of me would be inclined to praise this on crossover, and the whole fluke indie sweepstakes sort of vibe, but in reality, that part of me hears a badly produced Xerox of a sound I have heard done better dozens, if not hundreds of times before, even recently. Now, it's widely known that the girl in the single art is not Artemis, it's some guy, but that didn't stop a whole lot of the perpetually online, thirsty for the goth girlfriend to peg them, thinking that it could be, which might have excused his weak squeal of a voice that can't match the sonorous groove at all, but what it didn't excuse is how much the song is pure ego trip, trying to get this person enticed to them, but also hitting from the back so nobody gets attached. Hell, with the melodramatic pomposity audacity and preening manipulation. That certainly feels reflective of certain goth scenes I know. We could have had Corinne or House of Harm. Hell, we got a new and possibly final album from The Cure this year. We don't need this.
Tell them that I'm the sleaze, they telling me, okay, prove it. I lead these bitches on red, so now they know that they blew it. I tell them I'm moving units, my videos, they gon' view it. Spotify ain't gotta lie, they really streaming my music.
There are going to be a number of songs that make this list that got patently worse based off the actions of their artist, where you can't really ignore how it shapes their personas and the art in their wake. Yes, I get how it's not exactly fair, take it up with the ordinary passage of time, not with me. And first up on that list is Nicki Minaj, where I did not like Pink Friday 2 to begin with, but the singles that stuck around only got worse after her beef with Megan Thee Stallion, which she definitively lost. This was already barely a song, heavily reliant on the Waka Flocka Flame sample from, oh god, nearly 15 years ago, the lead and bass and that skin-crawling 3-note melody that's trying to build menace but really can't, because Nicki's flow feels like a stodgy nursery rhyme. It's shocking how lazy this sounds. Only the pre-chorus sounds convincingly imperious or imposing. The rest of the song is so obnoxiously basic, where she sounds so impressed with every punchline, an ego trip that only cascaded into her downfall later this year. I mean, come on, high heels on my tippies, I still got the juice bitch, buy a sippy. Are you rapping in a New York City kindergarten that somehow still has funding? You think this sounds imposing? And the line about knowing that people really stream your music on Spotify, Nicki, I've seen you crash out a number of times over the years on the numbers. I'm not remotely convinced by any knowledge from you that you claim to have in this lane. And I've long been unconvinced by Nicki's reign at the top by women in rap, and lazy junk like this is often the reason why. But let it not be said I'm not fair here.
Money, I'm a star.
お金稼ぐ俺らはスター
お金稼ぐ私はスター
キラキラ
私はスター
God, this got worse for me with every listen, and with the absence of hiss from even my expanded year-end charts makes this all the more depressing. Because I have been at the forefront saying that Megan Thee Stallion should diversify her content, and her anime fandom could add some unique texture and flair to her rhymes, even play a representational role highlighting how black women like her deserve recognition in those spaces. But Mamushi makes me cringe every single time because it feels very true to home as someone who's a little too into a certain nerdy fixation, and it just comes across as really stilted and awkward, especially when she tries to rap in Japanese and all her swag just evaporates. Now granted, Meg Thee Stallion and her verses are still by far the best parts of the song. I go back and forth whether or not it's endearing or a little bit voyeuristic, but it's not nearly as much of a problem as that painfully stiff bass line and the minimalist percussion against the staccato pianos that feel like they're on the verge of stumbling off rhythm. What happened to any sense of groove or momentum? I heard the album, Meg, you have that! Then there's Yuki Chiba, who utterly phones in his verse and has got zero chemistry with Megan Thee Stallion. This guy is apparently a major influential force in Japanese hip-hop, but you would not get that from this presence. But it's the awkwardness of this that just makes me kind of shrivel up whenever I listen. I'm fine with Meg's weeaboo arc, but this was a big misstep. Then the fact that it wound up one of her biggest hits this year, I'm not gonna say it was a good sign.
Is that too obvious? Okay, I like your confidence. Oh, that's what good karma is. Okay, like Kalani's. Roger like Kalani's. Okay, here at the parties. Right here at the parties.
You know, I don't want to put aside how this little twerp can't even recognize Kalani as non-binary for as much as he wants to fuck them, or how the opening vocal snippet isn't even from Kalani but Summer Walker, but it's also clear that that was never his point with this song. He's trying to reference a bunch of beautiful pop and R&B singers to accentuate how his target is such a bad bitch that he is addicted to, but also that he totally wants said bad bitch to seduce him because he's choosy and man enough and he don't play. If only he could convey remotely any of that in his vocal delivery, where he sounds like he's more playing on his mother's iPad rather than choosing shit, to say nothing of the painfully cheap-sounding drill beat, where it becomes very apparent the only reason this went viral is search engine optimization with a much bigger singer's name attached to it. And hell, the only reason that Kalani hopped on the remix of this song is that, well, they badly needed distraction from the utter mess of an album that wildly underperformed, and the mixtape that will form yet another R&B cult following that should be way more convincing and good than it is, especially given the mountain of bad press outside of that also came out around Kalani. For them, this became damage and brand control. For this kid, it's merely a bad minor hit. He's not gonna get another. Next!
Boy is mine. I can't wait to try him. Let's get intertwined. The stars, they aligned. The boy is mine.
Oh god, Supernatural was right goddamn there. You didn't have to push this. Truth be told, up until Wicked and a truly excellent performance as Glinda, I was willing to say that even if I like Eternal Sunshine more than most, it was a bad year for Ariana Grande. Yes and came and went, and as much as I like We Can't Be Friends, Wait for Your Love as a well-performing radio hit, this was the worst song on the album, and I hate that it joins the pantheon of really bad choice for a third single by Ariana Grande, a shockingly accurate pattern that only breaks down with POV in 2020. Hell, that song wasn't better than Nasty or Off the Table. Let's move on. The only reason this didn't make it on the list proper is that Ariana Grande is still an incredible singer, and apparently Brandy and Monica co-signed this on the remix. For all of you who weren't alive in the late 90s, which is still some of you, and didn't watch it when Mercedes and Santana did it on Glee, The Boy Is Mine is an R&B classic, and this is a warped bastardization of it, where you only have one perspective, so it becomes capricious, and highlights just how bad Ariana Grande is at playing the openly cruel mean girl. She comes across as haughty and disengaged. If you yourself sound bored, why should I care? More importantly, why were you better at doing this with Glinda but not here? And I can almost excuse it in the context of the record. The self-delusion playing into the drama highlights a moral ambiguity that I would like if the production wasn't a fucking train wreck. I know that Fantasize is one of those unreleased Max Martin songs that Ari stans have wanted to hear come to life since 2021, but it wasn't really worth being the lead melodic snippet being contorted off key, mess the trap gloss and the synth bass, how the hook seems almost hesitant to even start, how they chop her voice on the very end of the hook, the bizarrely major key bridge. It sounds like a track desperately assembled from scraps of ideas, where the main bad idea is somehow the only thing holding them together. Again, thank God Popular is still a banger, even if I think Kristen Chenoweth's version is better, because this sure as hell was not.
I'll come and slide by 8 p.m. and send a text to your DM. Buy honey for your fucking hair. Too honey for your fucking nails.
No joke, there is a part of me that legit feels kind of bad for Forbats. He gets the big Drake cosign, he signs to Gamma, insert conspiracy theory how much Gamma Drake has a stake in, and then he has to release this album on the same day we got 616 in LA, Family Matters, and Meet the Grams. I wouldn't wish that on anyone. But then I remembered that Act 2 Date 8 was Forgettable Drek even before Drake makes it considerably worse on the remix. I heard a lot of people call Forbats an AI-generated artist, but at least to me there was a distinctly ugly and very human vibe to his exhausted complaining about how much he's having to trick in order to get this girl in the first place, who already has another partner, and just to get a date. And again, it's trying to convey some sort of dominance, but in between Forbats and Drake, I hear astounding weakness, where you're left wondering how much of this is about women at all, or just keeping up the tedious chore in order to impress other men. And speaking of Drake, not only does his presence slam whatever feeble momentum into a brick wall, but his bars are just awful. Before I end up in Jeopardy like the game show, I'm a stand-up guy like Dave Chappelle, especially given his reputation as of late. These are bare minimum effort drafts that barely even try to make contextual sense, because who cares, right? It's Forbats getting the laziest possible Drake stimulus package, one he probably now regrets. Good riddance.
You a bad bitch, fuck it up. Freak bitch, she touch her toes like what? Like, she said it's summertime, she tryna have some fun. Get lit. If you a freak, do your shit, don't run. Don't do no running.
This sort of song crops up nearly every year, and it almost always feels like I'm punching down. The relative no-name rapper who catches a little bit of virality for a throwaway at best song. A bunch of other rappers try to capitalize to hop on the remix, and leaving the original guy high and dry with no obvious follow-up in sight. And yeah, happened yet again as 310 Baby tried this haggard slapdash Blueface impression. Guess who hopped in the remix to sound just as bad as usual for a relatively by-the-number sex song that kind of proves NLE Choppa might actually have talent, and being so ridiculous you wind up laughing at him. Now this song doesn't have anything close to that sort of imagination beyond the sex bars, a really bad Michael Jackson reference of which I feel like I have heard dozens if not hundreds of times before, the laziest possible Steal Your Girl reference on the second verse, and the one gag referring to Soak City Water Park in California with the commercial punch-ins. And as someone who legitimately loves water parks, that's the last thing I want to hear. Granted, the production smothers that, and the pianos with painfully cheap percussion and awful bass mixing, but the line that strikes me the most is, if you a freak, do your shit, don't run. I'll give it to 310 Baby, you're not supposed to run by the side of the pool, otherwise you might slip and fall and drop your career. And yeah, that's our dishonorable mentions. It's gonna get kind of rough from here on out, folks. Let's get started with number 10. So the industry rumor behind the scenes is that there are a number of rappers who are insert verse, which is behind the scenes terminology for a rapper who gets a hook or a great sample flip on the production, and all they do with the song is write a 16-bar verse in order to fill the time without much consideration for the rest of the song's construction. They might not even contribute. That's not inherently a bad thing. It's normally how guest features work, especially if you're just trying to write to a hot beat, you're not trying to build references or ideas within a song with other artists. But when it becomes a factor in your own songs on your own albums, it might be a sign that you've surrendered way too much creative control, or you're out of ideas, or the song is a disjointed mess that's really just riding on brand name star power.
We gon' spin and kill deep in the spot. A nigga tellin' now. We gon' spin and kill deep in the spot. A nigga tellin' now.
There are rappers who had a worse 12 months than Nicki Minaj, but few as embarrassing. Starting off with Pink Friday 2 being the sort of sequel that highlights exactly how much was lost between Nicki's glory years and now, and then this becoming one of her biggest hits from said album despite being a goddamn disaster. I'm not against the big junior-senior sample or how Nicki attempted to use the punch-ins, but the gimmick here is that she was just using the word body to finish off lines, including a hard rhyme with Vince Lombardi, which is certainly forcing it. And not only is there nothing new being said from her, and that being all she really does, it's in the context of threats where she wants to kill, either on the mic or maybe otherwise. I don't think the jaunty Danish groove fused into the Jersey club fits the tone, or is remotely convincing. Speaking of which, this is where Lil Uzi Vert probably shows the most effort, and by that I mean grafting chunks of Just Wanna Rock onto this song, and then dropping a lot of luxury porn and referencing how apparently Glorilla is their cousin and she is still their op because they're dating JT. After the year that Glorilla just had, with 2 very strong projects and a bunch of tangible hits and real momentum, in the same year that you dropped Eternal a Take 2, I think you may have picked the wrong side, Uzi. Whatever, it's a clusterfuck, and Nicki better thank her lucky stars that Bigfoot was such a non-hit that it didn't get the automatic top spot for this list. This ain't what you want. It feels a lot more prophetic than it really should be. Number 9. This is one of those entries where honestly I don't have a ton to add about the song. It's not going to be remembered. If it is, it's certainly not kindly. But it is bad enough to get on this list because who the fuck said Jesse Murph should be making country music?
Got me wide, wide open, got a 45 on him, and he pushing about 102. Always smoking something, he ain't worried about nothing, cause he ain't got nothing to lose. I got a thing for the...
I think I can state definitively that Jessie Murph is nobody's favorite singer. If you like her, you probably like a lot of other acts that sound just like her and do her own sound better. She's not your first choice. Now, she was on my radar as early as 2022, but I've come to know her since for her grating nasal vocals, bottom shelf production, and categorically bringing down all of her guest stars to her level. See that trash Heartbroken with Polo G from last year? I don't think he's been the same since. Now, this is arguably her breakout hit, and it sounds terrible. I blame BB Rexa for thinking that this sort of vocal tone can work in mainstream pop country, but at least Meant to Be had a hook, whereas every slimy layer around the snap beat and the crummy production highlights how painfully budget this is. And that's where we get Jelly Roll sounding like he's singing through a tin can. I'll have a lot more to say about Jelly Roll as this list goes on. Suffice to say, the past 2 years of Jelly Roll's redemption arc music industrial complex has resulted in a lot more bad music than good, and even here it sounds like he's cashing in a check as a favor to Columbia in order to help their D-list get any sort of radio crossover. But what it reminds me of most are the crummy white rapper, questionable pop singer Bonnie and Clyde riffs from the mid-2010s. Think Him and I by G-Eazy and Halsey, or Bad Things by Machine Gun Kelly and Camila Cabello, where this is easily the worst of all three just on talent alone. Those could at least aspire to be some cheap Riverdale core. This is plugging up the dregs of the worst country bar you have ever had the misfortune to visit. Flo Rida and Sia made a better song about going wild with this title than you did. Inexcusable. Number 8. As I said earlier, there are songs that got worse this year based off the behavior of their artists. Take it up with the linear continuity of events, I do not know what to tell you. But even beforehand, I thought this was garbage. It only got worse with time. And speaking of songs I may have predicted would have wound up on this list.
My notepad called many bodies. Screenshots saw plenty problems. Voice notes bag plenty hotties. Can't just talk to me like anybody. Can't just talk to me like anybody, man. You bitches know that I'm a somebody, and little baby bad, she got a John body.
Drake has had a lot of bad qualities, but one of his worst in recent years is his faux self-awareness, where in the music video after drinking with Morgan Wallen, their car gets blown up by 2 women, and we get this pseudo-visualizer of a music video of them celebrating before they get arrested, but really Drake and Morgan Wallen are just fine. You see, it's ironic because they're totally aware they look like assholes and give people what they want by being the target of all of your scorn, and then highlighting their worst possible qualities. But ultimately, it does keep them in the public limelight anyway. And how did that work out for you in 2024, Drake? I could also talk about why this song exists, or really why the whole Scary Hours 3 EP exists, because after Joe Budden ripped into For All the Dogs on the podcast, Drake dropped the project to prove him wrong, along with a trademark social media temper tantrum, and that EP is nowhere near as good as Drake stands are gonna tell you that it is. I found more songs I like on For All the Dogs, but this track was terrible along the way. The worst on that EP by a mile, with the can-sounding bombast and the crying women samples, as Drake tries to hit that balance of being unconvincing bragging and whining that he got dumped, where in the first line he's highlighting just how many women he's drawn in with his pen. So why the fuck should anyone believe this new breakup is different or matters? You can ask why nobody can see the good in you, and then on the second verse you get this line about how he puts careers on shelves like Amazon, taking them both in and out of the game. Very telling that Smiley gives you an ad-lib. I haven't heard shit from him despite otherwise being on your label. And he then tries to brush off how people love to diss him with that Disney line, as he tries to get the sloppiest crowd shout along as the song Waste Your Time fading out. What it highlighted is that Drake could not fathom or remotely contextualize just how many and why people hated his guts. I think after this year, he should probably know. Does Mercedes make a hearse? Think Drake might need one. Number 7. I don't know why the success of Zach Bryan seems to have caught so many on Music Row off guard, but it certainly did, and the rush to find someone who's got a similar gravelly voiced and raw angsty appeal, they kind of started picking up whoever they could in order to cash in. Probably fortuitous timing given the whole social media firestorm around the end of Zach Bryan's 2024. And hey, for the music industry, not inherently a bad thing. While I had concerns of how well that sound would work running through a lot of mainstream polish, independent acts catching catching a wave, that can be promising. Sometimes good people get put on. Now, the artist here predates that phenomenon, but there is some overlap in the rougher edges of their fan base, and proof that this sort of cash-in can work. And let's call it be mishandled.
I'ma take the high road, maybe get stoned, have a little too much of something terrible. And I'ma let you cool down while I walk out. You ain't messing me up like the times before.
Everything about Koe Wetzel's story the past 5 years depresses me. If you knew his early Texas country days in the indie scene, he was a bit of a loose cannon, a lot of talent, but messy and hedonistic, and also intensely self-aware about how much his asshole behavior will bite him in the ass. Then he got signed to Columbia, which he celebrated with an album called Sellout in 2020, but then he started getting the real push with El Paso in 2022, and especially 9 Lives this year. And yeah, I'll acknowledge, the dude is talented. He can write a catchy hook. And his first hit, Sweet Dreams, I think's pretty good, if oddly melancholy coming from him. He used to have more of a sense of humor. Well, this continues that streak and pairs him with Jesse Murr for some sort of atrocious reason, and we get the worst sort of 2000s throwback to the sludgy country rock that every post-grunge band views as their fallback option when their careers end. And where the hell did Koe Wetzel's humor and attitude go? He's trying to be stoic and take the high road when he's getting called out, but it's total bullshit. He's doing it because he doesn't want to humor this hysterical woman, made all the worse by Jesse Murph playing into that god-awful trope by then cheating on him, and there's nothing even implied that Koe Wetzel was cheating outside of her word. I don't think I buy it. It's a miserable goddamn song where everyone is an asshole that can't snip this sort of bait and switch like Goche's somebody that I used to know. And even if that self-aware framing has always been a part of Koe Wetzel's whole deal, it's so tedious and paired with one of the worst voices ever pushed into country because Columbia has nowhere else to put Jesse Murph. So yeah, I'll take the high road. This sounds like something Hinder would have released in 2006. You don't want me to say more. Number 6. I know some folks are going to be surprised this is not higher. I was tempted. It was originally only a dishonorable mention, but with every listen, it got much worse. I get why to an entire generation it's nails on a chalkboard, but it's also balanced out by that older generation who thinks it's a return to form and proof that he can never be canceled, and my stomach just sinks because that's my generation, and they apparently once again missed the goddamn point. But for me, Marshall, I'm just so goddamn tired.
Abracadabra. I'm about to reach in my back, bruh. Abracadabra. Poof, just like that, and I'm back, bruh.
I'm starting to feel nostalgic for Not Afraid and Berserk. Both those songs are over 10 years old. I've now spent decades with Eminem, and he's starting to remind me of that friend who's got the one joke or smart observation that was funny or insightful a long time ago once, but now it's excruciating, but you kind of humor him because you know he's got nothing else going on. But with Eminem, I'm sorry, there's no excuse. Put aside how this song and album is a stale repetition of a thematic arc he's been hammering since the late 2000s, where Slim Shady is the nightmarish id to white America, where it feels less like the fans don't get it, and more like that they choose to not get it because Slim Shady says what they really feel, because you can't apparently say anything these days. But diehard Eminem fans know he's got more going on. He's in his 50s, his daughter got married, the Detroit Lions and the Tigers are good simultaneously for the first time in decades. You're an elder statesman in a genre that actually still wants you. You can get any producer or collaborator you want. You don't have to keep doing this. And yes, I know the context is that Houdini's trying to put all the shit to bed once and for all, but no, that's not an excuse for the song sounding like shit. The god-awful Steve Miller Band sample in a song I don't even think the fans of that band like, the horrible vocal mix in the first 2 verses before Slim's verse comes in to end things off and sound way sharper than Eminem has in years, proof that he could have always done it if he wanted. And yes, I get it, he's pissing people off, that's the point. It's not like he hasn't made that point for decades. decades now. But with the forced Megan Thee Stallion lines, the participation trophy line, the horrible R. Kelly line, so many atrocious trans jokes where even if one of M's adopted kids is non-binary, I don't think the past gets around being aware of the time and place in America. You know what, not to get too political too early, y'all know what's coming, but hearing M hit those lines to be so purposefully misunderstood by one of the worst fandoms in mainstream rap as justification for their cancel culture whinging, it was just a headache and a half to handle, especially when I reviewed the album. You don't need a last trick, M. You need a new one. Number 5. But speaking of total fucking headaches,
These beautiful things that I've got, please stay. I want you, I need you, oh God. Don't take these beautiful things that I've got.
the big reason Benson Boone got big in 2024 was because UMG was boycotting TikTok, and that allowed chart momentum at precisely the right time for one of the worst fucking hooks of the year by the artists who are not on UMG. There's a lot else wrong with the song, the verse chord progression that reminds me a bit too much of Zac Brown Band's Colder Weather, enough to piss me off, the non-transition between the tempos that does not help the crescendo, the utterly pitiful excuse for rock that sounds like Harry Styles' Leftovers, the fact that both verses acknowledge exactly how everything in his life is actually doing quite well, but he is racked by paranoia that it's all going to collapse in on him, and he delivers this desperate, clingy caterwauling with the sound of a sheep that's getting set on fire. And that's before the whole post-chorus where he starts mewling and wailing like a reject from AJR, and someone should really call the burn unit. The sheep is now very much on fire. Nothing from Boone's presentation or voice works for me. He's got no grit or firepower, instead opting for this willowy romance undercut by his panicked yelping, where it sounds like the percussive force of every flip he does is impacting his testicles. He should really get that checked out, but thankfully I don't see a long trajectory for his career. He had another hit this year with Slow It Down that was mediocre at best. The only reason he and this song were as big was a corporate pissing match where the only losers were the artist and the listening public, and it wasn't even for his label. None of this is remotely beautiful. Move the hell on. Number 4. I think last year I predicted that this would make this list. It's been long in coming.
I'm vanilla, baby. I'll choke you, but I ain't no killer, baby. She 28, telling me I'm still a baby. I get love in Detroit like Skilla, baby. And the thing about your boy is
I don't like no whips and chains, and you can't tie me down.
but you can
Whip your lovin' on me.
That's right.
Whip your lovin' on me.
So one of the reasons people double down on scams is the embarrassment of feeling tricked or hoodwinked. You never want to admit that someone got over at your expense. And looking back at every defense I made of Jack Harlow's charisma in the early 2020s, I understand that embarrassment. Because while the downward trajectory has been apparent for a while, this is where the nosedive truly kicked into gear because I have hated this for nearly a year now. It's a shame because the Cadillac Dale sample is actually pretty nice and the groove has some crisp swagger to it. All the more stark in contrast to watching Jack Harlow's charisma melt in the winter sun, because this is humiliating. I was already rolling my eyes at him calling himself vanilla in the bedroom later, then spelling out the word missionary, although now I'm realizing it's tied to his skin tone as well. Somehow the double entendre got worse, but then he compares himself to Rico Suave with another stupid spelling gimmick. Now if you know anything about Geraldo and that era of early 90s pop rap, it's actually more painfully apt than you might think. I'm almost surprised he doesn't compare himself to Vanilla fucking Ice. But no, he'd rather drop hashtag rap with lines like, I keep it short with the bitch Lord Farquaad, or the line, she's an alpha but not around your boy, she get quiet around your boy, as if this guy is trying to be some sort of credible ladies man while making Shrek references. Not saying you can't do that, but to quote Kendrick Lamar here, I know when they call you the boy, but where is the man, because I ain't seen him yet. But at the end of the day, nah, cheap, embarrassing pop rap riding on a sample that is by far the best part of this song. And the best thing that I can say is that Jack Harlow has been utterly unable to follow it up. And one last thing, for sports fans, the line, he gets love in Detroit like Skilla Baby, it's infuriating and depressing. According to Genius, Skilla Baby co-signed it. And 2 weeks after this crap came out, Jack Harlow performed this in Detroit at the Lions and Packers game. And the Packers beat that Lions team. knocking them out of the NFC 1 seed and denying them a first round bye and home field advantage at the NFC Championship. You have so much to answer for, Jack Harlow. Number 3. I did not want this song to be as high as it is on this list because for the lead artist, I started getting the impression this year was her 15th minute, and I pretty much despise the largest contingent of her haters. But when you pair it with the worst timing imaginable... I genuinely hate Sexy Red discourse. She's not my thing at all because her technical shortcomings really don't make up for how flagrant she is. Where Glorilla is a better and more ambitious songwriter, and Megan Thee Stallion has way more charisma, and Cardi B is funnier, and Cupcake is all of the above. And isn't it great we don't have to rely on just Nicki Minaj to carry the banner for women in the rap, even in the mainstream anymore? But her haters are the mustiest men and women online who would rather argue about gender wars or OnlyFans on Twitter for the umpteenth time, rather than go outside and meet a member of the opposite sex, or face consequence of being ignorant on hip-hop, women, sex, and everything in between. And yet, guess who's also on Gamma and may have no other choice than work with Drake at the worst possible time? This came out after Not Like Us. It's very clearly designed as a vehicle to get Drake that other summer bop, and man, it did not work. Which should be kind of obvious. Take Keith's metallic production and the weedy fragments were stuck trying to support Sexy Red trying to sing on key. A talent I'm not sure she possesses. And then you don't even get the over-the-top sex references from her, or a lot of credible energy. So the only reason she's perpetually offbeat is that contractual obligation? Then Drake shows up, and no, Drake, you're not bullying shit. You got bullied, we all know that. It's probably why you thought lines like, "I'll turn librarian for you, I'm booking that shit," or saying that this girl slips and trips and falls on his dick, or the awful university lines to end off his verse. But what's very telling is how he tried to flip BBL Drizzy for how he bought so many women plastic surgery while ignoring his own, where he tries to take over the joke and the vibe just dies. Well, the party dies. There were so many moments that convinced me Drake lost this beef, probably the most stark being the double feature on Camila Cabello's album this year, or that Wagwan Delilah atrocity, but this was among the most pitiful. It's often said the harshest thing you can tell your male partner is that he's not as funny as he thinks he is. This was that moment. You ain't what the culture's feeling, Drake. Might be time to come home, mend bridges, start from the bottom again. Number 2. But going back to Sexy Red, I understand her music. I get the appeal. I just don't really care for it. If I want that style, I can get it from so many other acts. But I don't like bringing all that up because when I imagine the folks who hate Sexy Red the most, it's hard not to think of this.
Go, 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 go. Hair so good, she honorable. She ride a dick like a carnival. I done did the impossible. Go, 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 go. Hair so good, she honorable. She ride a dick like a carnival. I done did the impossible.
Perhaps it was a sign in 2024 that this went to number 1 that something was deeply wrong and needed to be addressed and fast before it was too late. And indeed, I spent the vast majority of my year making a point to ignore Kanye West, because it's not like I was wrong in any of my predictions or rationale. It's not like half the artists with vocals on this song have domestic abuse allegations against them or something, or the gross feeling that to a chunk of the audience that's part of the appeal, or the soccer hooligans they brought in for the chant that they don't have connections to Italian fascist, or that the entire song is purposely trying to be this grotesque horror show provocation that wants me to get mad, but also wants to be seen as victims of persecution, as Kanye West draws stark parallels between himself, Bill Cosby, R. Kelly, Chris Brown, and Diddy, as he remains the most divorced man outside of Elon Musk ranting about his kid's school, rather than that Donda Academy tax evasion scheme / nightmare fuel that he was running. But you know, that's all the obvious stuff. Alongside way too much focus on the teeth of women sucking these guys off, in that the whole carnival vibe is just rancid from the jump. Not only is it derivative, chasing the nightmare theme park vibes of Astroworld from 6 years ago that have not aged that well for the record, but somehow feels smaller and cheaper by extension. A sort of carnival that leaves you with an upset stomach on the jerky rides, bad food, and worse entertainment, because you really had nothing better to do and all the carnies are leering at you along the way. There's honestly so much awful shit spilling out of the edges of the song. Cheap grain of the percussion, the oily mush of it all, Rich the Kid here for no discernible reason, you couldn't get a better rapper, Ty Dolla $ign sounding vaguely embarrassed to be here as he interpolates the flow of Racks by YC and talks about hoes wanting to fuck his car, the fact that Kanye threw a hissy fit when Ozzy Osbourne would not clear Iron Man for the sample, so he then samples Hell of a Life, one of the best songs from My Beautiful Dark Twisted Fantasy, so you gotta ruin that too, now crushing this bilge water, and Playboy Cardi gurgling about the swag covering his body like a disease. I think it's probably venereal. And for all those who said, well, at least the beat goes hard, just turn off your brain, no! I'm not dumbing myself down to ignore how the producers of said beat and much of the Vulture's albums did not get paid, just like I predicted, or how, like, through so much of 2024, featured rap production that went way harder than this. The best thing to say about Like That going to number 1 was consigning this direct to irrelevance that only topped the charts because the UMG TikTok pissing match voided the rest of the competition, and everyone ignoring Kanye's attempts to make that beef all about him. Man, that felt earned. But we also can't ignore there's a subsection of predominantly white male teenage dipshits who think this is all hip-hop is. The dweebs that unironically follow Andrew Tate and say, your body, my choice. This year proved they're not going away. Maybe the carnival should be driven out of town, and they receive a thorough ass whooping. Can't say it wouldn't be deserved. And finally, number 1. Yet, for as much rage as I spewed, I was never going to give Carnival my number 1 spot, partially because I didn't want to give the craven losers that like it the satisfaction of any assumed victory, partially because it was shockingly easy for me to ignore this year. My gym took it off their playlist in record time. Nobody wanted to hear it. And you might think, well, you put Try That in a Small Town by Jason Aldean at number 1 last year, what's so different? And for me, there was a number of factors. Namely that the horrible country discourse by a lot of well-meaning folks who should absolutely know better being the controversy mechanism to get the song to number 1. Especially as Jason Aldean's career floundered desperately right after, as I also predicted. And as I've always said, if you really want to piss me off, the best way to do it is disappointment. And I haven't had expectations for Kanye West in over a decade, not like I've had reason to. Whereas here, yeah, this one hurts.
She said, give me a dirt road, the windows down. You wanna get lost on the edge of town in a Chevrolet. She said, give me 6 packs of Brooks and Dunn. If you want a country girl, you just found one, let's slip away.
You know when the real obvious sampling dominated pop music in 2022? Well, it took a little longer to get to Nashville, but make no mistake, there were multiple contenders on that alone could have made it to this list. I Can Feel It by Kane Brown grabbing up Phil Collins in the air tonight. Ultimately too flimsy to be all that contemptible, especially when Kane Brown's could just go work with Marshmello again. Then there was Lonely Road by Machine Gun Kelly and Jelly Roll, which I don't hate nearly as much as I think I should, because for as shameless as MGK's genre hopping really is, that song doesn't feel as phoned in as it should. There are some weirdly clever moments in the whole Take Me Home Country Road sample. It is excruciatingly obvious, but it's no sacred cow for me. John Denver wasn't even that in his time in the 70s. People forget how much true country artists hated that song in that era. But this was that for me. Drift Away by Dobie Gray is a classic soul song, one of his only 2 top 20 hits, where I even like Uncle Kracker's cover of it in the early 2000s. The composition speaks to me that strongly. I do it at karaoke. It's one of my all-time favorite songs. And they gave it to Dustin fucking Lynch and Jelly Roll, chopping a classic song to ribbons for Dustin Lynch's non-personality and Jelly Roll's Walmart soul affectation to crush it into rubble with painfully canned percussion and the painfully squealing twang and the crowd chatter for a bro country hookup jam / Chevrolet commercial. It's very clear they had no clue how to do anything with this beyond graft the melody onto a hook, where in the chorus they reference Brooks and Dunn. You couldn't sample something from them to bastardize. It would have been better than this. And of course, they get rid of the slowdown and the change up on the actual bridge of the original, because that would actually demand some iota of subtlety beyond this dated, braying trash heap. There is no soul to this. You get Jelly Roll, who actually has the voice to credibly pull it off, and his non-effort beyond the cosign is staggering. He can't even show up for the video. But it's Dustin Lynch where, for some ungodly reason, I'm most disappointed. I was the first person to review the guy on YouTube. I thought he legit has talent. There's a song on that album that I reviewed in 2014 that literally sounds like a Poets of the Fall song. I don't make that up. You can tell he's been torn between country and arena rock his entire career. It shows in the over-the-top stage show. So why default to the laziest trend chasing imaginable and defecate on a classic when you do it? It's not even in your wheelhouse. Give it to Jake Owen or something. He's already ripped off John Mellencamp. It's rare that I assert the absence of good contributes to the worst music I would call in a given year. I don't even think it's fully true with this thanks to all the grave robbery, but I hate this more than Carnival because while that represents a tread that can and will be stomped out, this is the soulless chugging of the nightmare machine of Music Row that would tear up a classic to serve an also ran, and that naked, exploitative trend is way harder to kill. For a genre that loves to prop up history, they sure love defiling the classics for a song that nobody will ever remember. I don't expect anyone else to have this as the worst hit of 2024. For me, it's personal. I get it, objectively Carnival's the worst song by any music critic standard. This filled me with way more rage and exhausted contempt than anything else, highlighting how much more I can be disappointed and how much more work we have to do. I hope the Chevy breaks down, your six-pack is warm, and the girl gives you blue balls. At least that melody might move me. So yeah, thanks a lot for watching. If you want to see more, please be sure to like, share, drop comments, subscribe. Yeah, I got a little angrier than even I expected with this list, but hey, sometimes that happens. You never know. Beyond that, though, anything else I might be able to do to improve my presentation, I'm all ears. Please hope you all stick around for the best list. It's going to be coming in a couple of days. And hey, if you want to help support the channel, see maybe some videos early, link to my Patreon is right over there. And hey, once again, I really appreciate anyone who comes around. Tough times, I understand if you don't, but the option's available. Till then, I'm Mark, you're watching Spectrum Pulse, and I'll see you next time.